Lee Anderson kicked out of the Conservative Party for saying this.
I don't actually believe that these Islamists have got control of our country, but what I do believe is they've got control of Kahn and they've got control of London. And again, this stems with Kahn. He's actually given our capital city away to his mates. We've got Starmer. Beware, because if you let Labour in through the back door, expect more of this and expect our cities to be taken over by these lunatics.
Islamists have got control of Sadiq Kahn and control of London. So there are two parts to that. Control of London. Islamic Palestine activists, in an absolutely categoric gesture of ownership, projecting their "From the River to the Sea" slogan, which literally means wipe out Israel, onto that part of the UK Parliament building, which is one of the most evocative cultural symbols of the country. Did they seek authorization? Did they think they needed to? Was the mentality, well, we'll just do whatever we want, or was it, we own this place? The police clarified to a degree. While there are scenarios where chanting or using these words could be unlawful depending on the specific location or context, its use in a wider public protest setting, such as last night, is not a criminal offence. So we know they didn't ask permission, but apparently calling for Jewish genocide in those circumstances isn't a criminal offence. But actually it is. Public Order Act 1986. A person is guilty of an offence if, with intent to cause a person harassment, alarm or distress, he displays any writing, sign or other visible representation which is threatening, abusive or insulting, thereby causing that or another person harassment, alarm or distress. So it turns out that this is, in actual fact, entirely potentially illegal. No authorization, good case for it being actually illegal, zero response. But when the boot switches to the other foot, things can change. The findings from Tell Mama UK show an unacceptable rise in Islamophobic incidents across the capital in recent months. This is deeply unsettling for Muslim communities and all of us who want to live in a peaceful and tolerant society. Naturally, it is not deeply unsettling for Jewish communities to have Islamic communities illegally calling for their genocide. It's an obvious double standard which might suggest that Islamists might have an inordinate influence in London. How about Islamists calling for holy war on the streets entirely without consequence?
The only solution is jihad by the armies of the Muslim countries.
The police arresting old men carrying Union Jacks for the crime of being present while Palestinian grievances are being aired.
You don't have to say anything.
Are you fucking kidding me? He's being arrested for carrying a Union Jack in Downing Street. Are you serious?
How about the police watching on and acting as a cloakroom attendant for the flag while a terrorist sympathiser climbs the scaffolding, climbs down again, and then the police don't arrest him, but they give him his flag back.
Palestine will be free.
Thank you.
So, saying Islamists have got control of London, whether or not it's actually an according to Hoyle correct statement, and it would be an extraordinary situation where you could literally demonstrate that Islamists have actually got control of London, it's still a pretty reasonably defensible statement in the light of the evidence. As in, a reasonably defensible statement in the light of the evidence, and a reasonably defensible statement in the light of the evidence, and a reasonably defensible statement in the light of the evidence, and a reasonably defensible statement in light of the evidence. But control of Sadiq Kahn. Sadiq has a long history of standing shoulder to shoulder with Islamics, and before becoming London Mayor, he stood shoulder to shoulder with 5 such characters in the Tooting Islamic Centre for a pro-Palestine meeting. Pro-Palestine, fair enough, but who was he standing alongside? We have the Reverend Stephen Sizer. Apparently he was sympathetic to the idea that Israel was behind the Twin Towers terror attack in New York. Let's move on quickly past the Reverend. Then Ibrahim Hewitt. You see that interpal down there? He seems to have advocated stoning for adulterers, the death penalty for homosexuals, and he was the chairman of that interpal organisation, which was designated a global terrorist organisation because it facilitated the funneling of money to Hamas. Then Azim Tamimi looks a bit angry, don't you think? On record as wanting Israel destroyed to be replaced by an Islamic state. and I left the best to last. Daud Abdullah. I actually did a video on him in 2018, and he is, amongst other things, an ex-director of the Muslim Council of Britain. I may have forgotten to mention that Sadiq Kahn is also an ex-director of a part of the Muslim Council of Britain. So this fella Abdullah, he led a boycott of Holocaust Memorial Day in 2005, obviously a day very important in the Jewish calendar, and in 2009 he was a signatory to the Istanbul Declaration, which required in part that support for Israel in so-called Islamic territory, Islamic waters or whatever, be considered a declaration of war to be fought in all ways possible. That's the declaration, and that's that one at the bottom there, number 8. This potential declaration of war on the British Navy didn't go down too well, and there were calls for him to resign, all of which the Muslim Council of Britain and Abdul totally ignored. And he's still here, as far as I know, because diversity is our strength. Sadiq stood shoulder to shoulder with all these fine men, and Jeremy Corbyn is on the list as well, but I understand he never showed up. As leader of, as I mentioned, a part of the Muslim Council of Britain, Sadiq spoke up for one Yusuf al-Qaradawi. We find out about him here. Tories step up attempts to link Sadiq Kahn to extremists. With all due respect, it's not too hard. And Goldsmith here is Zach Goldsmith, former London mayoral candidate. Goldsmith said last week that it was just weird that in 2004 Khan spoke up for Yusuf al-Qaradawi, an Egyptian Islamic scholar associated with the Muslim Brotherhood. Khan at the time was chairman of the Legal Affairs Committee of the Muslim Council of Britain. David Winnick, a member of the Home Affairs Select Committee, asked him then why Britain would want someone like Qaradawi, who had said, "O Allah, deal with your enemies, the enemies of Islam. O Allah, deal with the usurpers and oppressors and tyrannical Jews. O Allah, deal with the plotters and rancorous crusaders." Khan replied, "I cannot comment on the specific quote you have given, but there is a consensus among Islamic scholars that Mr. al-Qaradawi is not the extremist that he is painted as being by selective quotations from his remarks. It would appear that if this Islamic hellfire and brimstone is given a better contextual framing, it'll come across as less extreme. I'm not sure what context would help to detoxify, oh God, deal with the tyrannical Jews, so it's unlikely that Sadiq's response would stand up to in-depth research. Or for that matter, the next paragraph. Qaradawi has previously cited Islamic texts calling for the killing of Jews and has endorsed suicide bombings according to the US-based investigative project on terrorism. The list lengthens. Sadiq calls moderate Muslims Uncle Toms. This was to Iranian state TV when he was government minister for social cohesion, and he was accused of only working with Muslim moderates and giving money to their organisations.
You can talk about articles in the newspapers about what one organisation may get. The point is that you can't just pick and choose who you speak to. You can't just speak to Uncle Toms. You can't just speak to people who will say what you want them to hear.
Uncle Tom is basically a racial slur on a black man who is accused of being a traitor to his own kind for his own benefit and the lazy advantage of his slave-owning oppressor. He accepts his way of life and he kind of enjoys it. Sadiq is saying, I don't only work with moderates, I also go out into the most rabid communities. But he calls those moderates Uncle Toms.
You can't just speak to Uncle Toms.
That choice of words, slip of the tongue if you like, and he apologised for it, comes from his long association with extremists who regard moderates with contempt and talk like that. He went to these kinds of meetings, rubbed shoulders with these kinds of Muslims, and came away talking the extremist talk. So in terms of Sadiq, he rubs shoulders with extremists. He speaks up for Muslims who advocate for suicide bombings, and he uses Islamic street lingo because he's so used to it that those kind of toxic phrases just slip off his tongue so easily. And in terms of London, you have calls for Jewish genocide the police are totally happy with, and calls for holy war on the streets that the police are totally happy with. And on the other side, old men carrying Union Jacks being arrested for being a voice of dissent during an Islamic rally, but the police giving back the Palestine flag, not arresting him, giving it back when the boot's on the other foot. So when he says Islamists have got control of Sadiq Khan and they've got control of London, It's not exactly an outlandish statement. No more than this is an outlandish statement in the Commons.
The real issue is that this House appears cowed by threats of violence and intimidation. We have allowed our streets to be dominated by Islamist extremists, and now we're allowing Islamist extremists to intimidate British members of Parliament.
Islamists dominating the streets and intimidating MPs, Islamists have got control of London. Somewhat similar statements in their way. The one MP, Robert Jenrick, quite correctly wasn't kicked out. Why was Lee Anderson kicked out?